Hello and welcome or welcome back to the channel. My name's V and today we have a long one to watch. I have actually been putting off watching this because I thought at some point that I was just gonna, watch it off stream or off record or whatever. But I heard a lot of recommendations from people who have either played WoW in the past or who still play it now in Dragonflight, and I realized that I really want to watch it with you and comment on it with you. We're not going to watch the entirety of this video. The video is called A New Era for WoW inside Blizzard headquarters, and you can find it on Preach's channel. What we're specifically going to watch is the actual interview between Preach and Ian. And I think it's going to be really good, really insightful. I still haven't really changed my mind when it comes to the actual Dragonflight and whatnot, but I do want to stay caught up with the news and provide some insight if I can and listen to you what they have to say. Anyways, excuse my setup today. I actually started recording fairly late as my toddler's already in bed and we now share a room, so I'm actually kind of in the hallway with my two screens and ready to go. So yeah, that's pretty much the reason why I'm here. I'm not like, I don't know, homeless or anything. But yeah, if you happen to be here on the channel for the first time, you're more than welcome to subscribe to it. This is where I do all of my variety content, which now includes discussions on World of Warcraft that used to be on my main channel, but I decided to do that here on VPlays as my main channel is now almost exclusively Final Fantasy XIV. So hit that sub button if you enjoy RPGs of all sorts. And without further ado, let's watch the video.
Now let's talk to Ian. I mean, you serve so many different player types, right? I mean, I'm not sure how your metrics work, but one of the questions, because I think it's really tough when you're out there and you're not just a content creator, but you're anybody's. The vast majority is a horrible, horrific term that gets thrown around all the time in reference to World of Warcraft. This is what the vast majority likes. What do people actually do in the game? Because we don't know.
I think everything. Honestly, I mean, I think that's one of the quirks of WoW. It's part of the magic of WoW. It's part of what makes designing for WoW really challenging at times. I think you could take a dozen people.
Honestly, it's very hard to believe this. Even though I really want to believe that people do everything, and it's easy to say, oh, people do everything, because you have like a certain, no matter how small percentage of people who do a certain thing in the game, and you can legally, technically include it in this interview and say, yeah, people, do, I don't know, fishing, or people, I don't know, do whatever obscure little thing there is that, normally isn't done as much. It's not that people don't do fishing, but people mostly when they finish leveling in World of Warcraft, they focus on the end game, and that is the vast majority of people. So this is kind of a weird question to ask, and it's easy for him to say, "Oh yeah, we have people doing literally everything." But after playing through Final Fantasy XIV, I now know that people actually do everything in that particular game, and in comparison to WoW, I'm still very skeptical when it comes to that. I'm just having a hard time believing that people are out there just doing everything in World of Warcraft, because most things are just basically irrelevant for your progression when it comes to your end game content, and that is something that World of Warcraft players, as a majority, do focus on.
All of whom would say WoW is their primary game. It's one of their favorite games, the game they play a ton. You could sit them around a table and have them talk about what they do in the game and why they like it.
Mm-hmm.
And it could sound like they're describing 12 different games or experiences that would be foreign to the others. It really is everything from the, completionist solo collector to the casual PvPer who just queues Battlegrounds all weekend, to the hardcore PvPer who wants to push high rating, to the Mythic Plus focus player, to the casual raider, to the hardcore raider, to everything in between.
Yeah, maybe that's like 5 or 6 different people who do Mythic Plus, raiding of any sort, PvP at its competitive level, maybe casual PvP like Battlegrounds, and completionists. And some people will go ahead and say that they also do crafting. I honestly, at this point, I'm having a hard time just remembering anything on top of my head what it is that people do in World of Warcraft, except for these like 5 different things. And MMO as a theme park now, the way I'm used to it, could be described in like 20, 30 different ways and not 5 different ways. So yes, from their perspective and their numbers, they can see people doing things all over the place. But there's a thing with World of Warcraft is that whenever you want to do something, you are kind of forced into doing 5 different pieces of content in order to be doing that. And I have a very dear friend who actually described the whole process to me, who just wanted to go and do, I don't know, a little bit of PvP, but then for PvP you need gear, for gear you need this or craft that is relevant for your any sort of progression that you actually want to do. So excuse me for being super skeptical about this, but I'm hoping that at least my mind can be not swayed or changed, but at least somewhat influenced by this video, because that's kind of the reason why I'm watching it.
All the different Venn diagram overlaps, and all of those people are World of Warcraft players.
Yeah.
And it's and I think the world is, again, as I said earlier, richer because it has all of them in it. But a challenge is, there is no majority, so to speak. It's a collection of many minorities, each of whom have different and sometimes competing interests.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the challenge when it comes to listening, addressing feedback. I think, often the two are a little bit conflated, where hearing feedback.
The fact that people do something in the game doesn't at all mean that they want to be doing that. And we know this from Torghast, from all these different things. I think Blizzard team for the longest time has had these metrics confused. It's like, oh, people do this content, but what kind of experience are they having? Are they having a good time? Are they just second screening it while, I don't know, watching Netflix? Are they even engaged and involved? Would it be their choice to be there if they didn't have to be there, or would they just be doing the activity they logged into the game for, is my question.
Should mean in the eyes of players, and understandably so. Well, do what I say. I told you I don't like this. We told you we don't like this, and you didn't change it. Therefore, you're clearly not listening.
Especially if that person believes they're a reasonable person. I'm a reasonable person, and I think you're incorrect. So.
And they are, and they are a reasonable person, and I think it's totally reasonable to want to advocate for the game that you want to play and the play style that you favor. And it's our job to take everybody's concerns into account. It's not a player's concern to take other people's happiness into their account when playing a game. They just want what's going to make it the most fun for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think the challenge comes where sometimes those desires are directly conflicting. Where
You got an example?
Yeah, I mean, I think rewards are a clear case.
Oh, I'd love to get into this with you.
Yeah, right. It's basically the people who want to do a thing and don't see any value in it and want it to be more rewarding, versus the people who don't want to be forced.
Rewards are one thing, and rewards are a wonderful way to get someone to do something, because people will feel like they're willing. If your reward is a currency for your progression item, or if your reward is an achievement that will let you do the content that you want in the first place, that's where the problem comes, and that's where all the frustration and anger has been coming from. They have to learn how to differentiate between the actual reward and something that is tied to the progression, not of that particular thing, but some other thing, like kind of the way Torghast was.
Forced to do the thing and want it to stay not rewarding at all. Or, should PvE gear have any place in PvP?
But in
or
vice
ways. Versa. And to some extent, like we can continue to separate out the ecosystems to solve these problems. We can say there's no crossover whatsoever, and you're basically playing a completely different game if you're doing this activity versus that activity. Or to the extent that there's crossover, there's going to be some people who would prefer it weren't that way.
For sure, because, I mean, one of the most common things, and I'm guilty of this, and what I can also honestly say after now we're here is, I definitely got to the point where I was so immersed in it and not happy that I definitely went overboard with where I was, which I think is the place you end up with because of a business relation. It's like, ordinarily I just put the game down. Yeah. I don't know whether it's an internal pressure, and I kind of think this goes back all the way to Nax Ramis, the original one. Where it's like, we've invested time and money into this content, but if we don't make them go, they're not going to go. And I don't. Is that something that's a very real thing?
I think it is a real thing. I think make is maybe too strong a word.
Mm.
But
No,
if we don't
it's not.
incentivize it, if we don't make it feel like you are progressing in some way as a result of it, then yeah, people probably won't do it. And I think if we make
That's literally not true. That is not true. I know that I spend a lot of time comparing Final Fantasy XIV and, World of Warcraft and systems and the way they are, but these kinds of things, honestly, I disagree with this and it makes me angry because that is not the way it is. People will do things without being forced to do things if they find those things fun or enticing or whatever. Final Fantasy is one proof. People are not forced to do glamour. There is nothing about glamour that is relevant for their, I don't know, endgame progression or whatever. People still do glamour. There is nothing, I don't know, nothing that makes people go and do those side quests in Final Fantasy XIV that are a few patches long and are literally just story, kind of like the Moogle Postman quests and the Scholasticate quests and the Tales of the Dragon Song War quests and these kinds of things. Nobody makes you do it, but people still do it. Yes, it has a reward at the end. Maybe it's a glamour piece or an achievement or something like that. But I doubt that there's a lot of people who do it exclusively for the item because people just really love these stories. The stories are good. Just make something good and just trust your player base that at some point they will touch it. And honestly, I feel like what he's saying is when translated into like relationships is what makes relationships toxic. It doesn't matter that it's a game. At this particular in this particular example, he says that people have to have like a strong reason, or be somewhat made to do something, otherwise they won't do it. Imagine if your partner in your inner relationship treated you like that, believing that you have to do some things, otherwise I don't know, you just wouldn't do them. Imagine, I don't know, dates or participate in activities in this or that way, because if you weren't forced to do things that you may not want to do at the moment, you wouldn't do them at all. That's kind of toxic, isn't it? Like, I believe that, and I think that that mindset needs to be changed. I feel like FF14 has been brave enough to make these standalone pieces of content with not minuscule rewards. They are rewarding and really cool to get, but they made these separate game modes that people do that have nothing to do with their end game progression of, I don't know, their rating or whatever it is. Like, let's say Palace of the Dead. People still hunt the Necromancer title. Technically, having something written, under or above your name is not really that big of a deal, but people find it rewarding, and they are in no way, shape, or form better overall in game because they have this title. They didn't receive gear that they need to be raiding in the current content or whatever. It's just a very hard but very satisfying thing to do. And I believe that World of Warcraft and their team has to be more brave when it comes to these things. They have to trust their players that they will make the decision to play something if it's fun enough. Look at Mage Tower. Mage Tower, for example, was insanely popular. And what did you get out of Mage Tower? It wasn't gear. It was some glamour or transmog pieces, and those items never have even had anything to do with the actual progression at all.
made a zone full of awesome quests that literally offered no rewards. It's a hypothetical, right? No experience, no gold, no
Dragon.
items, nothing at all. But it's really cool content. Most people wouldn't touch it. People who did
Not
might
true.
touch it once.
Not true.
And that's not to say that, the people who would do it, if
How about considering that people who didn't touch the optional content were too busy playing the mandatory content that would get them to do the content that they really want to do during their main game time. What if someone really wanted to do the cool side quests in Suramar or whatever, but couldn't because damn, they get like 2 hours a day to play and they had to invest those 2 hours in their Torghast runs, and next day they had to go and do Mythic Plus or whatever because they didn't have their, I don't know, their weekly chest whatever things that are gonna drop next week. You know what I mean? It's like they're treating players still like they have like 6 or more hours a day to play. As a content creator, I don't even get that time. I get 3 to 4 hours during my live streams, and the rest of the time, I don't even get to touch games. I basically just edit content and do stuff for my channel. I don't even get to play that much, and there's not a lot of people who can invest that amount of time into just doing what they really want to do as their main content, and then doing what they have to do to be able to do the main content, and then do the side content to fill out, the time or whatever. But that's not how it works.
If you're doing it to level, who would do it if you're doing it to get a professional recipe to whatever, are going to dislike it as a result. But at the end of the day, it is a game that, as part of just the core RPG progression, you have a lot of goals. You're making your numbers go up. You're trying to overcome challenges. You're choosing how to spend your often limited time these days wisely. And you're going to spend that time doing things that are getting you closer to your goals. Maybe like at the end of an expansion, when you have no more other goals left, you might go back and chase cosmetics or do things that you haven't had a chance to just for completionist's sake. But those feel like lost opportunities when there's something out there that has potential that's just underutilized.
Yeah. So where do you draw the line then in being incentivizing it via power? So it's Torghast throwing the legendary requirement into there,
Yeah.
Versus this gives you a cool mount. Do you see a distinct difference in participation? Because it's like, oh, they'll just look at it. And I guess a good example of this would actually be challenge modes.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you know the participation rates there, which were purely cosmetic rewards, right? That's all that challenge modes gave you, was just a transmog.
Yeah.
And did that come across as perhaps a failure? Because not enough people did it?
I don't think challenge modes were a failure, no. Their participation was overall quite low. It got a bit better. I want to say, if I remember, towards the end of Mists, I think we added a decent chunk of Valor for doing challenge mode runs that helped, it helped justify it to people who were just looking to cap their Valor for the week. They could at least work towards something else at the same time. But it wasn't seen as a failure because I think it also, as someone who worked very directly on challenge modes, 10 years ago, it wasn't 30 people laboring to make this thing. It was, let's try an extra difficulty. Let's add an extra overlay on the content we're already making. And for the people who got a lot of value out of it and a lot of enjoyment out of it, that felt well worth what we put into it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, yeah, you're correct. When we're looking at a major expansion feature like a Torghast, if that were only used by as many people as did Mist challenge modes, that would have been seen as a significant failure. It's like we put
that sucks because that's literally admitting to to everyone out there that Torghast was forced into its success by metrics, by just making absolutely sure that everyone goes there. Like, that's not a game, that's called a job. It's like, we don't want to be doing our job while playing the game, which is rich coming from a content creator, but still, when you actually do play the game for the sake of playing the game, you don't want to feel like you're made to do anything, and that really sucks. And I feel like World of Warcraft has been getting better better at normalizing this behavior to people for years now, to the point that people are just like, meh, I guess that's just how it is now. It's toxic.
a ton of time, design, resources, engineering, art, iteration into this. If only 8% of our players did it, well then we should really we should have just put those resources into something else that 90% of our players were going to do, because we would have made more of our players happy. At the end of the day, that's the challenge we're trying to solve. It's we have a finite team, even as we grow, even as we hire, we have this many person hours of work that can be done this year. How do we deploy those? How do we allocate?
I want to know, when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV, for example, how many people were involved in the design of Gold Saucer and how many resources went into Gold Saucer, knowing that nothing you get from Gold Saucer is going to be applied to any other form of, your progression or whatever. That's what I'm really interested in. How many, how many resources of FF14 go into the content that technically no one should even be doing if they were to apply the system?
Allocate those in the way that's going to make the most fun for the most players.
Well, one of the things in Dragonflight that's changing is because obviously part of what I would consider the failure of Torghast is that people felt. I know that one of the reasons I stopped playing was I'd log on to my alt, and it was like, okay, I kind of need to farm a legendary, I kind of need to conduits, I kind of need to do this. And as somebody, as I'm sure you're aware, I was a huge champion of Torghast. Like, I had a great interview with Morgan about Torghast, and then a lot of it changed. And I was like, this is just killing my soul. It made me very unhappy. It's like, where do you then... Is that just a case of looking at alt friendliness for that? Or is this in Dragonflight where you actually have completely smashed this out of the park?
There's a few pieces to that. I think even aside from alt friendliness, which was clearly an issue there, I think that the mandatory weekly loop, the feeling that you have to do this basically every week, essentially forever. And if you miss a week, you're falling behind. And if you put it off, I think that's something that got us thinking a lot about just the player psychology of how people approach mandatory things with expiration date, perceived chores, like that feeling of maybe it's Monday or I guess Tuesday if you're in Europe, and
Wednesday.
The last day of the week is what I'm talking about.
Oh,
so
okay,
Tuesday,
okay.
if you're in
Tuesday,
Europe,
all right.
you had a long day at work, then you went out for dinner with your friends, with your loved ones, whatever. You come home, you're exhausted, and you realize like, oh crap, I haven't done my Torghast run for the week. Exactly. Does that make you feel good about World of Warcraft in that moment? No. Absolutely not. And so, why are we doing that to people? And there's a lot of ways around that. There's, it's catch-up mechanisms so that, if you knew that if you missed it this week, you could just catch up and do 2 next week or whatever, suddenly the psychology is very different. If there's more flexibility and, you can do multiple weeks in a row, or if there's just if it's less of an exclusive reward that only comes from this one source, now suddenly it's fine. Yeah, you're tired tonight, you had fun doing other things, you don't have to log in when you don't want to. But in any case, getting back to Torghast, I think, it was gameplay that was kind of forced to overstay its welcome in a lot of ways because it became something that you had to keep doing for as long as people did. Something that we've tried to pivot to, and I know you mentioned you didn't personally jump in and do Zereth Mortis.
No.
But part of how we approached the activities there, the cipher system, the reputations, the outdoor loop, was basically we're going to give you a couple of weeks of the first couple of weeks. We're going to say, here's frankly a carrot that everyone's going to want. You want to get your second legendary. You want the ability to craft your Unity legendary. That's the second one that you can equip. Doing that's going to take you a couple of weeks of checking out the content. Past that, everything is 100% optional, but you've seen it all. And you can decide whether you like it or not. And if you like it, you've gotten a taste and you can keep going.
That's funny. First 2 weeks of mandatory content, whereas they've increased the mandatory sub to 2 months instead of 1 month. And then they're like, oh, but we're giving you 6 weeks of time to do whatever it is that you want. I don't know.
And if you don't, cool, just never go back. You can ignore it and focus on Mythic Plus, raids, whatever else. It's a little bit of a middle ground between there being no mandatory power at all, where a lot of people who might have enjoyed the content will never even give it a chance because they're like, well, why am I going to do that? It doesn't give me anything. Or obviously the opposite end of the spectrum where it just becomes an endless thing that you have to keep doing.
You've taken a pretty hard stance at this. For my playtesting of Dragonflight, this has now become almost a core value of Blizzard going forward, or seemingly, but obviously we're here to talk about it today, is like just no more of that. No more mandatory stuff. And is there like an internal fear then? It's like, are we making stuff now that people aren't going to check out? And are we actually okay with that? Because a lot of games now are going with a more drop-in, drop-out style, and they're still maintaining a sub. Is that something... I mean, this is a risky move you're making in Dragonflight, I think, internally.
I think, so, the concept of mandatory, I do think only applies to a certain portion of the player base. I think...
Not true.
It's certainly, a high-end competitive player.
Not true. They think that only, 10% of the players will want to, I don't know, craft their legendaries or whatever. But the reality is that you literally cannot go and raid normal even without your legendaries, because they're literally going to be required for you to enter the the content. What happened in Battle for Azeroth with the Azerite cloak thing? Like, you literally could not even go to the raid if you didn't have the cloak with your, I don't know, corruption or whatever. They like to think that it's only a small amount of people, but if that's one of the three end game pathways that you can take after you've done your leveling or whatever, it becomes pretty freaking mandatory and important for a whole bunch of people out there.
If there's any advantage that they can get, they have to get it. Well understood. But I think some of what we're also moving away from that lets us, like systems like Renown or Outdoor World Loop, they have powerful rewards from them. You can make, this profession crafting reagents at the end of a Renown tracks that will let you make 402 plus gear that is heroic raid quality. There are other, profession recipes and other things that people will look at and want, but the mythic raider who's looking to, push for the Hall of Fame isn't going to look at any of those things and say, oh no, this stuff I need from this that I can't get elsewhere, therefore I have to do it.
Yeah.
And some of that is just a product of moving away from the auxiliaries, so-called borrowed power alternate advancement systems that we had in the last few expansions.
Well, that's good.
Item level is kind of the simple universal reward. Item level is power, but it's fungible. You can get it from other sources, and it's only as valuable as how it compares to the other stuff you have access to, as opposed to artifact power, essences for your Heart of Azeroth, conduits, all those other things, where it didn't matter how high your eye level was from other content, you had to do this because it was additive.
Mm-hmm. Well, they were great things, though. Like, it was always the acquisition that was the problem. Like, the actual result was great. I just don't want to farm 50,000 honor in Battlegrounds, Like, the actual system itself. And Azerite Armor in particular is one that I'm deeply upset about, because I genuinely thought item level is something, and again, it's personal bias, I have no issue with Mr. Does his World Quest having the same item level as Mythic Raider. But Azerite Armor seemed to perhaps open the door to be like, well, we can tailor this now to world questing and your experience. We can do it for PvP. We can do it for Mythic Plus, make 5-man more fun things. It didn't go that way, unfortunately. It was kind of the set bonuses throughout there. But now you are upping the rewards from Mythic Plus, giving those guys natural appeasing people like JB, so we can actually stop raiding for the most part. And is that something that's also changing long term, or is there still an idea of, if you're not raiding or doing high Mythic Plus or high in PvP, you should still be a bit lower?
I think there's definitely a little bit of still a spectrum there. Eye level, is if you want 415, 421 type gear in Dragonflight, you're going to need.
I don't know. Like, I think they should ideally strive towards having multiple ways to progress and obtain gear that is of equal level in different activities. For example, PvP gear like at the highest competitive level should be as high of an item level as it is, I don't know, mythic raiding gear or whatever. If it's heroic, that should be maybe not end game, I don't know, arenas that are considered harder, maybe end game battlegrounds or whatever. I have no idea. I have no idea how I would do it, but I still think that different players should have different rewarding activities, and raiding is not the singular most I don't know, elite or the hardest thing that people can do, and it shouldn't be.
Need to do high-end PvP, high-end raiding, high-end Mythic Plus.
Mm-hmm.
We do want outdoor play and certainly professions to be able to push farther into that track than they ever have before. Good. I think at times in the past it's felt like if you were a solo player, but you kind of capped out at maybe you could get a couple of normal mode raid pieces, and otherwise you were like 30 eye levels behind the Mythic Raider. That's, I think, too large a gap, and something we'd like to close. And that's, really speaking, getting back to some of the earlier conversation about player groups and silent majorities and so forth. We do feel like we have underserved the just solo outdoor focused player who chooses to spend tons and tons of time in World of Warcraft over the years, and they care about progression too.
Yep.
And I think it's often inaccurate to just assume, oh, well, because you're not trying to push high keys, why do you even need item level?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, people want the number to go up.
Speaking to Ian this time really opened my eyes to some things, and probably something that you guys have been guilty of as much as me. Why don't the devs listen to us? I spent months, years of my life shouting from the rooftops about things that I considered to be obvious problems, and in many cases did turn out to be. So why is that not getting back to them? Well, it turns out it is. A lot more than you guys probably realize. I spent the entire week with the communications team. Those were the guys who were guiding us around, and they were absolutely incredible. But one of the things they really stressed to us is how much on a weekly basis they gather as much information as possible from the community, reading forums, subreddits, everything, watching videos, and feed that back. He was with Blizzard for 9 years on the communication team itself, has no reason to lie, and the only reason he left Blizzard was because such a large advancement in his career came up elsewhere. Well, that's one thing we learned from the current community manager team is like, I was like, what is your day-to-day job then? And we're like, well, we get like the patch notes and we sift through those for things that are relevant because a lot of them are like bullshit data side things that nobody cares about. And then we put them out to the public. But another part of it,
I mean, I honestly believe that it is not up to the people who collect information. I honestly want to believe, and I do believe, that those are the people who are really passionate about making some of these changes that the community wants, because they're the ones who have the community in their ears. And honestly, they're the ones who probably play the game a lot as well. But the problem comes when you have to like push that to the people in charge. It's either, I don't know, the change is either too complicated to make in a short period of time because of a lot of like approvals that it has to go through, or maybe the change is not seemingly profitable. And those are, I guess, the two things that are actually stopping them from doing their job.
it is we basically read forums a lot and we gather all that feedback and then we present that to the relevant people to say this is the kind of community feel right now. Did you feel like you had to filter that for like what's relevant, what's not?
Yeah, I mean, there was a significant portion of my time at Blizzard where developer communications was my job. And then my job got reconfigured into being more influencer focused, and everyone was like, why does Lore hate us now? He doesn't talk on the forums anymore. I'm like, well, yes, that's because it's not my job anymore. I'm no longer doing that specific task. There are other people doing that task. Go listen to them. Yeah, there was a lot of that general job and position is not even so much filtering as, I guess, distilling is how I would put it.
Make sure it goes to the right place.
Yeah, make sure it goes to the right place. Make sure that, because a lot of times people will say one thing and what they actually mean is kind of something else. Like, they still mean what they say, obviously, but if it's like, wow, I really hate, like Torghast was a great example where people were like, they really, really loved Torghast in early beta.
Same.
And then when it came out, they were like, wow, I hate Torghast so much. And the takeaway from that was, okay, what changed? And what changed was rewards were added to it. And so then it became a
both,
task.
right? They took rewards out because they had gear and stuff in it originally. It was,
yeah.
It got silly. They took all that out and then they just made you do it for legendaries, which was a complete like 180 on what it originally was.
That's what I mean, though. Is like, it's the sort of thing where if Torghast had just remained as like a fun thing that you could go do when you felt like it, I think a lot of people would have enjoyed it because they didn't feel obligated to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as you add that obligation,
that's the problem, is that more people doing it and feeling less satisfaction is more valuable than less people doing it and feeling more satisfaction. And that is not putting the consumer first. And that's just a really sad thing about this.
That was the point where it became a chore for people, and it became Torghast at that point. And so that was the sort of thing that like we would look at that sort of feedback and we'd be like, okay, yes, everyone's saying they don't like Torghast, but the majority of the reason we can tell from reading all these different things, and like obviously there's a variety of opinions as well, so it's always a matter of like what are the biggest pain points to be discovered, because like occasionally there were some people just like, I don't like the way the Ghost Boys look. I'm like, okay, well that's valid opinion. You're allowed to not like the Ghosty Boys, but that's not what I'm going to take to the development team as like a priority issue that needs fixing.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean by like sometimes people are saying, they just say they hate something, and you have to spend some time figuring out, okay, why do they hate this?
Yeah.
What about it is
I mean,
the
it's no
actual
different
problem?
in YouTube comments. It's like, I fucking hate the sound of his voice. Okay, do you hate my accent? Do you hate the microphone I'm using?
Yeah.
Am I too loud? Am I not normalized properly? Like, trying to figure it out, or is it just, you just hate the sound of
It's
my
actually
voice?
your face. So.
Yeah, which is odd because they specifically said my voice. But now I see in the mirror, it's probably that. But most of the feedback does get back to the guys, to the developers, which, obviously one of the biggest complaints in the WoW community is, like, they're not listening to us. I've been bitching about this nobody knows better than me is how much I bitched about some of the things in Shadowlands. But they do generally get most of the stuff there, which is surprising when you find out. It's like, yeah, they do. They kind of do.
Yeah, if people are, especially once a point becomes like, well, everyone knows that no one likes this thing. It's like, well, yes, everyone also includes the development team by this point. You can be fairly confident in that. And a lot of times, then the job actually, it gets interesting because a lot of times then the job becomes, okay, what are the other things? Because everyone's talking about this one thing that's really upsetting everyone right now. I don't need to tell the development team for the 30th time that people want to be able to switch between covenants. Like, they know that. I don't need to tell them that again. So what are the other topics that are going on in the community that they're not aware of because everyone's so busy focused talking about this thing?
See, that's the problem. You go over the most important things that the community is saying, but instead of fixing those priority things, it's kind of like developing some sort of like a checklist of things, like a to-do list or whatever, and your job is to compile this to-do list or whatever. But then you have people who are in charge of like getting rid of the tasks in your to-do list, and then they're like, "Ooh, but we don't like these tasks, or we don't want to be doing these tasks." And then the person who is in charge of doing a to-do list gets to be in charge of making an even greater to-do list until the tasks that are convenient or I don't know, important to the person who wants to do them pop up so that they can do them. But these ones that are already in the checklist are just forever there unchecked. And that was the main problem with Shadowlands, at least in my opinion.
And so making sure that those other bits of feedback and those other smaller conversations still make it to the development team. And that's not like trying to like distract them from the more important conversation or anything. It's just that work doesn't need to be done. But yeah, like, so a lot of time there's been cases in the past where it's like, okay, the team would learn about what the features were in the upcoming expansion, and I would be like, okay, that feature is the one everyone's going to hate. Like, I can tell already what's going on here is people are going to be very upset about this.
So like me with Covenants, I mean, I knew in 2 minutes it was like, this is a bad idea.
Yeah. Covenants was a weird one just because I did not fully understand what it was for a while. Because, like, imagine Covenants ended up being a pretty convoluted, especially with, like, you add in soulbinds and everything as well, ended up being a pretty complicated and convoluted system. Imagine if none of that work had been done yet and someone was just trying to vaguely describe what it was going to be to you. That was the state that I was receiving this information in. So I was like, I don't understand it yet.
At BlizzCon,
I don't know what it is.
They were announced, and we were like, we all fill in the gaps ourselves.
Yeah.
Right, that's what happens. And I came up with a really thorough RPG storytelling thing and all this, and like.
And that is what the Covenants should have been. Honestly, it should have been this filler thing. It should have been this role play thing. It should have been something that, yes, the story revolves around, like it does in Shadowlands, but they should have stopped at that with cosmetics that is just easier to obtain and with currencies that are not mutually exclusive. For example, I don't know, you getting the achievement for building your, what's it called, the Covenant Sanctum buildings or whatever in one Covenant, and receiving the achievement that allows you to get more anima doesn't apply if you switch your covenants. If you switch your covenants, your achievement no longer works, and you're still getting these tiny pieces of anima, even though you already have your covenant buildings in one of the covenants, just because of some, role play reason, because you've built this building for these people, but these people are not those people who you're working for. And this is, again, putting the player experience second in comparison, because it just technically doesn't fit the lore. But these kinds of things that directly damage your player experience and waste your time when you've completed that task already, like they should have addressed that. And I don't think anyone would have a problem with this particular thing, with that achievement being important. And what I was gonna say is, I think I actually said it wrong. As far as I remember now, it wasn't switching the covenants that made you get less anima. I think it was switching alts, because the achievement that I'm talking about, I can't remember its name, but it wasn't account wide. I remember having this problem because I had one of my characters in Night Fae, and when I would switch to my other one in Bastion or whatever, I would get smaller amounts of anima on that one, but I wasn't willing to switch the covenants all the time on my main because I had to raid. So that was the issue. It's a little bit less dramatic than what I initially said about about switching the covenants and then the achievement not applying, which is not the case. But it was still pretty bad because you want to collect all of the rewards from all of the covenants. And for me as a completionist, that was a big deal, and I didn't understand why I had to do this massive process in all four covenants on all four of my alts, because switching between covenants on my main was just so damn inconvenient.
So these are going to be awesome.
That's one of my favorite like pitfalls that I try to warn people about with like every job that I've had and every announcement that I've been a part of is like, please be sure you're ready to talk about something in a complete sense before you start talking about it. Because if you just throw out like a vague idea of like, here's what this is going to be, we have this idea to build something that's kind of like this, they will fill in the blanks.
Yep.
And they will either, if they're feeling negative, they will fill in the blanks with all negative things about how this is going to be the worst thing that they've ever experienced, and thus they will hate your thing before you've even made it, or they will build it up to be this amazing, like huge, groundbreaking thing like Island Expeditions. This happened with Island Expeditions in BFA, where everyone was like, "Oh my God, we're going to go to all these islands, and it's going to be like this really cool, like PVE but kind of PvP-ish sort of thing, and that's going to be great. And we're unearthing these artifacts, and we're finding all this cool stuff." And then we're like, "Wait, this is just a thing that you queue for? That's like
It gives you artifact power really quick.
it's just scenarios again, like."
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
And yeah, they've sold that as, I think Garrisons is probably the worst situation ever, because Garrisons, they were like, you're going to get to build it, and immediately the impression you get is, I'm going to get to
Housing.
customize this shit. I'm going to, like, as an old school classic raider, I'm going to have like Onyxia and Nefarian's heads like facing each other, and then I'm going to be able to have the tail around the building, you know, I'm going to customize it. And then when we got it, it was like, well, somebody has a stables here and someone has a stables here. And that's kind of the limit of your customization that you're going to get.
Yeah, that's also why I think it's important to like have started building something before you start.
I think it's about what the content is and how it's advertised, and it has a lot to do with transparency. For example, the garrisons as a system with the customization among the garrison is not really that much different than what we have in Final Fantasy XIV right now with island sanctuaries. You still don't get, the player housing that people thought they were going to get. There's still not that amount of customization that people thought they were going to get, and at most you can, I don't know, switch between where you're going to build these like landmarks and such. Some people will have landmarks here, some people will have landmarks there. Now there's going to be like music and orchestrion rolls that you can add so that you have like music playing on your island and whatnot. And I still think that people are in a much better mood when it comes to island sanctuaries than what they were with the garrisons. And it has a lot to do with just overall building your trust with your community and making sure that they don't fill in these blanks, and that they're not hoping that it is something that it isn't. For example, as soon as people started talking about island sanctuaries as, the new housing, Yoshi P made sure to let people know that it's not going to be like housing, that there's not going to be that much, the customization or whatever. And there was the initial disappointment, like, he really went and said it. And a lot of people who don't have a house in FF14, of course, they were, a little disappointed about it. But at the same time, I think very soon after that little bit of a disappointment, there came acceptance. And they're like, okay, it's not going to be a house, but this is what it's going to be, and I'm pretty happy with that because it's still something that I will enjoy. And I think with garrisons and what happened there, a lot of trust has been broken because they've allowed these gaps to be filled with the most incredible things. And I was around during Draenor, and I was a new player. I only just started World of Warcraft when people were already endlessly frustrated with it. And I didn't initially understand just how bad it was because I wasn't there when garrisons were announced. I was there when they happened, so I didn't have these initial expectations. For me, it was like a game mode for me to explore. So I did, but a lot of people were just refusing to do that because they thought they were going to be something different. And I didn't used to understand that. I was like, well, it is what it is. How come you thought it was going to be different? But back then, I didn't fully understand the culture of these announcements, these half baked announcements that he's talking about.
Talking about it too much, like just the nature of software and game development, especially at on a team the size of the World of Warcraft team, means that until you've built most of it, you kind of don't know what it is yet.
So now we know. Our feedback on streams, forums, YouTube, whatever, it all gets back to the devs on a pretty much weekly basis. And we're going to hear far more from Josh in his own interview we'll be uploading a little bit after this goes out. I found out why things don't change. Because you guys probably have the same question, right? We're moaning about it, we're complaining about it. Why is this feature not being iterated on, developed in some way? Suggestions we're putting forward not happening. This is when I learned about modular design. Modular design is a system that's been in place for a really long time and is going to be changing. In order to find out more about this idea, we're not only going to sit down with Ian again, but we're going to sit down with Tina Wang, who's the Associate Art Director of World of Warcraft, and Morgan Day, the Associate Game Director. Over the years, you guys have fell into a habit of almost cannibalizing your own game with every patch.
Yeah.
Which felt very wasteful. Like, I can't imagine the R&D that went into some of these systems. Dungeons, I mean, if you go back to Kata, it was like, in Wrath, every time the TOC came out, right, every other dungeon's irrelevant now. No point in doing it. And the same with raids, and obviously there's arguments to and for linear raids. But Season 4, you've started to maybe consider, we've actually seen this happen in other MMOs recently, certainly the ones that are a decade plus, where they're like, we have a wealth of content that we've created over these years, and we've just left it.
It's all useless.
And there definitely seems to have been a lack of iteration in Blizzard. Like garrisons. Garrisons are remembered not fondly, unfortunately. But the premise is really good. It's just people want maybe a more cosmetic style than a practical solution. Warfronts. Yeah. How excited was the player base when Warfronts were announced? And unfortunately, it didn't go that way. The same with Island Expeditions. You know,
there's something there's a very strange connection that I made between what I felt like in World of Warcraft with all of these side features that just got forgotten about, and between how my classes were organized at university. And I noticed that instead of just making sure that all of these things, like different, let's say, I don't know, for the sake of comparison of these classes, instead of all of them being integrated into you becoming, this person that you want to be, or the player that you want to be, or whatever, and using everything that there is at your disposal, you have like these different sections that you go through at a different given point of time that are important at some point, but then they just get left behind and you move on to the next one where you have to, I don't know, study for the next thing, do the next exam or whatever, and then you just end up not really fully integrating that into who you are. Like, I went to university for engineering, and it wasn't a bad university, but I, at the end of it, didn't fully feel like an engineer because I went through a lot of these, smaller classes, smaller sections that, teach you a thing or two, but some of them just don't integrate into what you need to become in the end at all, and just feel like, fillers, like they're there, for people to just I don't know, to just have something to give you grades on, and that just sucks.
The sneaky Pete promise, and you're going to hate these guys, and they're going to interfere with you and stuff, and then part of the mandatory element was there. Yeah. But we can reel a list off here of huge systems, huge resources that are brought into the game, which have been left to like, okay, and class halls I would definitely put in here, which feel like such a waste. Yeah. And what is the thoughts there now for like over the next few years is to change that instead of reinventing the wheel every expansion.
Yeah, I think, I mean, so there's a couple of pieces to that. Some of that is definitely the move away from, expansion specific systems that also would turn into borrowed whatever because they were going to go away, back to evergreen improvements. I think, broadly speaking, I think you could almost carve out 3 eras of World of Warcraft philosophy and development. And I would say that the first era was from Classic all the way through Mists of Pandaria, where every expansion was adding extra layers, extra systems, new professions, new races, new classes, new things. And then we kind of reached, as we were coming up on almost 10 years at that point, a turning point, arguably a little bit of a crisis, as we were coming off like 2 expansions in a row. We'd had like 12 to 13 month final tiers, and just looking at like this infinite scalability, like this infinite exponential growth of like what it takes to make an expansion, both in terms of development, but also.
I also feel like I know I draw a lot of parallels between World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV, but Final Fantasy XIV devs have openly admitted that they have studied World of Warcraft. But sometimes when someone learns from you can also learn things from them, even though they learned some stuff from you. And I think they should have taken a closer look at what Final Fantasy XIV has been doing throughout the years when it comes to eternal content that was once, the main content, but they somehow still found ways to integrate it into pretty much everyday life within the game. And there's a lot of humility that you need to have as a part of your person. And I know this as a parent, right? Like, as a parent, you have a small child and you teach them things, but that relationship is never going to grow, and you're not going to grow further if you don't listen to them and see what they're doing and try to also learn things from them, even though in your eyes they're gonna seem to, I don't know, seem smaller, or maybe less, I don't know, anything. Like, you should never be looking at someone who learns things from you as someone who's less than you, whether it's a parent, or whether it's a parent-child relationship or a competition or anything like that, because you can always learn things from people who are younger, or projects that are younger, or people who are less experienced than you. There's always something to learn, and I feel like World of Warcraft didn't learn from Final Fantasy XIV enough, and that's one of the things that they should have done years ago, because they wouldn't be in the situation where they're sitting on a gold mine of the wrong currency that they can't use. And that's literally the problem that they've created. They have so much stuff, but it's useless because they've made it useless because they didn't incorporate it into the actual game.
And complexity of like, how many systems do we have now? How just complicated is the game becoming? We're going to keep running this game for years and years and decades to come. Can we really just keep adding new permanent systems every couple of years forever?
Permanent.
No. And so I think, that's what led to some of the class pruning philosophy that went into Warlords. It's what led it to kind of pulling back in some areas, but also the idea that we needed to be able to make things that were not permanent, we could go deeper, focus them on a single expansion, have them be the hallmark of that expansion, but they weren't going to add to the ongoing complexity. That was, and so I think that was going into Warlords. And I think, as you mentioned, there were definitely some missteps with the garrisons.
Yeah.
But I think, moving ahead into Legion, it was like, well, okay, obviously we don't want something that pulls you out of the world. The class hall, in some loose ways, with the mission table, with some of its trappings and customization, was a little bit of a successor to the garrison system. You want it to be a social space where you'd see all the other people of your class. And of course, that's where you also brought in, a power component to it, artifact power, and all those systems. And it's important to bear in mind that, we're planning a couple of expansions in advance. The development cycle of an expansion is quite lengthy, from initial conception to pre-production, concepting, beginning to flesh things out. So we had, we knew what the feature set for Shadowlands was going to be well before Battle for Azeroth came out. And so a lot of that was the ongoing outgrowth of like what seemed like a very successful experiment in Legion. Legion was very well received overall, very popular overall. People were had nothing but praise for its systems. And so part of what, the team as a whole was thinking was like, okay, this is a great formula for a modern expansion. That
I see the thought process now.
What is our artifacts of the next expansion? What are the things that are going to fill these holes that we're going to leave? Now, there were a few things that we were still blind to. I think first off was the initial excitement of like, oh my god, I no matter how much WoW I want to play, I can always keep progressing my character. This is awesome. I can log in on Saturdays and feel like I accomplished something, as opposed to the raid logging people were accustomed to in Warlords. That was energizing initially, but gave way to fatigue by the end of Legion, as we started to hear, complaints about AP grinding and the sense of like, okay, I can always be progressing my character. That means I always should be progressing my character. I don't have
so you're
time
talking
for
about
alts
the
and
never-ending amount you can acquire.
yes.
Versus one thing that took away in BFA was that anything you did gave you AP.
Yes, that continued. So I think, but I think again, a lot of the decisions about what BFA was going to look like were already almost completely locked in for all intents and purposes before we started to learn the lessons from Legion. And even Shadowlands was beginning to respond to, well, what didn't work in BFA, what was missing from BFA, things like what could the successor to the class halls be, what if there are Covenant halls, what
That's it's a very strange thing to be designing something that comes after the next thing that you're going to be releasing. So they had Shadowlands in the works well before Battle for Azeroth. And as they were releasing Battle for Azeroth, Shadowlands was more and more developed, I suppose, and it's very hard to learn from something and actually implement it into the game you're making when you have to make it I don't know, a few years before it actually gets released. And I understand that it's a huge project, it's a huge game, and it somehow has to, work that way. But it just feels bad that things are so rigid, apparently, that they can't be fixed even at that early stage. It's like they have this idea and they're like, oh, well, it's over now. We've already established this, and no matter what the community says later on, or no matter what we learn from the expansion that literally comes in between these two expansions, it feels like it doesn't matter because they already have something set in stone. And I feel like that sets them up for failure big time, because of this inability to edit some things that they've set out as the core. So they had this idea of Shadowlands already worked out, but I feel like they at some point have stopped listening, and everything that they heard during Battle for Azeroth, they thought about it and they were like, okay, we'll apply it, in the next expansion or whatever. And that's just like counting on people to stay loyal to your IP, not really realizing that a lot of people are just going to up and, leave if they don't like the game anymore. And I think World of Warcraft, has had its healthy player base that started kind of, falling apart maybe a couple of years ago. Earlier than that, definitely around Warlords of Draenor, but like I feel like that they're only now realizing that people are just actually going to leave because now there's other choices, other games that don't require them to do this or that, and just feel better overall. And they're starting to change these things because now their actual metrics that they care about are getting affected.
What if these are, places that have more depth and interest to them than anything we offered in BFA? But it wasn't really until we were halfway through that cycle that we started to really have concerns about, the shift that had begun all the way back in Warlords, about the modular approach that would take things away. Because people were not sad to say goodbye to their garrisons at the end of Warlords.
Shame, because
right?
if they'd been iterated on, they were potentially something amazing.
Perhaps, but the feedback, right? So people didn't really appreciate the extent of that pain. When BFA came out, we certainly did.
Yep.
Losing your artifacts sucked. Leaving, having all your legendaries disabled the second you hit level 115 sucked.
Not a good day getting into that alpha.
And I think, but again, at that point, we were already heavily committed on the course we were on, because
that's what I'm talking
at some
about.
point,
They commit.
we have to keep marching forward. We have to keep making stuff. We
Yeah,
can't throw out a year of work. But we started to have misgivings about that general direction, and I think realizing that the cycle we're falling into is one where every expansion begins by losing something that was awesome, leaving a hole that we then, like, at best are scrambling to fill
That sucks.
and leave you maybe equal to where you were before, but if we screw up at all, lesser. That is not a path to success. And so that was the genesis for what I would like to think of as sort of
That's the problem they literally created.
the beginning of a third era of WoW philosophy, which begins with Dragonflight, which is trying to return to the idea of focused, evergreen things, improving baseline systems, introducing new systems into the game that we plan to carry forward, not introducing systems that we plan to, throw away at the end of a year and a half.
And this better be the foreshadowing of them introducing dragonflight and whatever into the older expansions and other zones as well.
Whatever. But doing so, I think, in a more some sort of thoughtful way that, as you were saying much earlier, gives us some opportunities to make use of prior content and, feels like it's going to be sustainable in the years to come.
I think we're really at our best when we're looking to solve problems, right? Like when you look at Mythic Plus that was introduced in Legion. Really, the problem that we were that started from a problem. We identified a problem of like, we build these dungeons that are so beautiful, they're so epic, they're really exciting experiences, and then you stop running them after like, the first month of the game.
Well, the new idea is really cool. To mix them all the old ones back in.
Yeah, and that's another one where we're looking to really take cues from other games and really look to build off of that foundation of like such strong content of like, okay, cool, these were still fantastic dungeons.
And you're not the only ones. Like nearly every MMO we've looked at that's gone the decade plus mark is now looking back at the not only thousands of man hours, but millions of dollars that have probably been spent, and they're just like, why did we just abandon that exactly?
We're just gonna leave that there?
Yeah, I mean,
Imagine how you must feel as the person who actually did the art and who actually created these dungeons. It's like being that kind of art creator for World of Warcraft who does dungeons has to be the least rewarding thing ever. It's like that your work is going to be appreciated for like, I don't know, a month or so. And I'm talking about the dungeons that have never been part of like Mythic Plus or whatever. It's like you do something, you make something beautiful, you work on something for like months and months, only for that to just be let go because of the people who are in charge of other things like game system. It sucks.
One of the revelations while I've been here is this idea that you had modular design things. And they had no intention of carrying them forward. And that just feels crazy, to know that it was fully intentional. Like, I get what they're saying is like, because you start the next expansion, thinking about it, planning it a couple of years way before, right? It doesn't quite fit into that mold, like Warfronts.
Right.
Probably don't fit into Shadowlands particularly well, so we're just going to make it and leave it behind. But as a general whole idea, do you think that's just going to go away? Like, we will look to, why are we investing time in this and not carrying it forward?
So I think there will absolutely be systems that are added to WoW that are evergreen and will continue to, move forward with us, and will continue to evolve those. But that doesn't mean that they can't change, right?
You can't think of what it's going to be in 15 years. Right? You have to say, like, let's put it out. What do people like, not like, and sort of grow it from there. And
totally.
Try and make it work. That's what I think we hope for. Because when I found out, it's like, no, it's never intended to go. I was like, you made like Sneaky Pete and this whole AI thing for islands, and it's like, yeah, but it's not going to go anywhere. So when we see that coming in, I think people will be really appreciative of that idea.
Right. And it's always fun, like you mentioned Sneaky Pete and the islands and kind of the AI that got built there. There's always exciting opportunities when we build things like that to try to look at that as something that we could leverage for a future feature, right? Like, I've always loved the idea of like, gosh, it wouldn't it be cool to add like an arena that was just played against like, AI essentially, but what if we made them really good and like, that could be pretty fun, again? Right? Like, can we like recreate some of the like BlizzCon champions, like how they're?
We did use some of the technology, right, with things like the comp stomp, or the abusing comp stomp. So they certainly are not Chalice Arena champions that you play against. It's like basically the honor farm situation, but we try to find small ways like that.
This modular design concept is really, really important to understand how World of Warcraft is made, and it will answer a ton of questions you probably have about features that came into the game and then disappeared. Features you probably consider to be failures. Torghast, Island Expeditions, Warfronts, etc., etc. The way it works is Dragonflight is about to come out, but Dragonflight has actually been in production for 2 years. As me and you are talking right now, and no, I did not get to see anything, I intentionally closed my eyes, the next expansion is already in the works. Now they have to base what's coming out next on what they've done before and what you guys might like. The best example here is Artifact Power and Azerite Power. Ian mentioned that during Legion, they took a risk with Artifact Power, a never-ending grind, and it was met very, very well by the players. At the same time Legion's coming out and people are responding to this, Battle for Azeroth is already in production. This system is going to continue in terms of Azerite Power. That means that the guys are already building their Island Expeditions, these daily quests out where things will pop out to collect Azerite Power. They're already building Azerite armor. This is all the stuff they're building as the natural succession to Artifact Weapons and Artifact Power. It's not until the end of Legion that people start getting annoyed with Artifact Power. It's an endless farm. I've been doing it now for 2 years. I'm getting frustrated by it. Oh no, our next expansion has exactly the same system in place with more twists and turns involved in it. And there's nothing they can do about it. We've already built it. It's ready to go. We can't just scrap it and start again because it takes 2 years to make more things. This modular design concept also plays into this. Let's look at mop farms. Mop farms were super cool, but they make no sense when going into the next expansion, Warlords of Draenor. What they do though is use that technology. So we see mop farms as a cool thing that disappeared. The trick is, it was never meant to continue. What it did do is turn into garrisons. Now garrisons contained a bit of farming and a bit more customization. Garrisons disappear. We as players see those features as failures. We look at garrisons and we say failure. Torghast, failure. We look at Island Expeditions, failure. And we consider them failure because they don't exist going forward. The fact of the matter is, they were never going to carry forward. Now this leads to various problems on iteration. How much resources, if players don't like it, can you throw into a system that you know is going to be gone in several months? The answer is not a lot, because you're going to be rid of it soon anyway. That's what's going to happen, and its replacement is already being built, if not already built. So you know that you're going to get an upgraded version. This is why they utilize the technology at the back end to make the next thing better, or they hope it's going to be better. So mop farms becomes garrisons. They then use that garrison technology to create class halls. They then use the class hall technology to make covenant sanctums, using that same tech. And therefore, they don't consider it a failure. But in the player's eyes, we do consider it a failure. And this is what's going to change. Instead of us constantly slotting in these Lego bricks of these various features and systems that we don't understand, like Soulbinds, and Netherlight Crucible, all those things that we just were like, what is this? And then it just disappears. Essences would be another example. Now we're going to look at things long term. Talent trees, we can keep that going. The new profession system, we can keep that going. And whatever else Dragonflight has in mind, there will still be some things which are expansion specific, because it does make sense that the new Island Expedition doesn't make sense in a Shadowlands environment.
So less is
more. But it should be way less so, with much more care given, like other MMOs are doing, to allowing them to go forward and be iterated on and stay with the familiar for the players. This feels like it's perfectly in line with the actual gameplay core loop that you're changing. Are you worried? Because I feel like the game has been out so long now. Someone like me could go look at Dragonflight and be like, heaven. I can come away for a week like I am now here with you guys. I'm not screwed. I'm not screwed over. I'm not screwing my raid team or anything like that. And this is fine. But we've now got a huge amount of players who have never known World of Warcraft without logging in and having a list created for them of things that they should do.
I think, honestly, people are learning this. They're either learning this through either Final Fantasy 14 for people who have, started playing the game recently, or, left World of Warcraft, or playing both games at the same time, or, people who are new to World of Warcraft who have been, recently joining World of Warcraft as new players. And there's actually a ton of Final Fantasy 14 players who decided to give Dragonflight a chance. And I think this is very important, because this kind of concept will be familiar to those players now, and there's a whole ton of people who have at least at some point tried FF14, if not loved it. So I think it's a good thing, definitely.
And how do you think that's going to be met with the player base once they get into an environment it's like, choose where you want to go?
And I think the hope is, well, I mean, there's still you can look at your world map and there's plenty of activities. There's world quests, other events. There's things to do to raise your different renowns that you're chasing. And early on, again, for the people who aren't don't have their sights set on doing high Mythic Plus or jumping in and getting into Mythic rating as soon as they can, a lot of the item level rewards from all of those systems will be very relevant. And going and helping either Rathian or Sibelian out the Obsidian Citadel or
choose?
Otherwise, depends. It
choose?
depends on how I feel on any given day.
Commit.
No. There's
Pick a side.
we'll see what the canon choice ends up being. But in any case, all of those things are offering powerful rewards. It's not like we've just said there's no more reward in the game. But for the people who, the people who are focused on the hardcore stuff, who are getting, 410 plus gear from other sources, they have plenty to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't need to try to, offer them more reasons to spend more time in World of Warcraft than they're otherwise spending. And I think, all this is just there with a sense of freedom to explore it as you see fit. For some people, maybe you're going to focus on getting raid ready during the first couple of weeks, and you'll come back and check out the renown tracks later because there are mounts or dragon riding skins or other things you want to unlock. Or again, if you're someone who's really focused on professions, there are specific recipes. If you're a leatherworker, you're going to want to work on that centaur renown to get some of the leatherworking recipes from there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all of the same philosophies are there. It's just we don't have that artifact power, that soulbind renown, that thing that is just hitting everyone over the head with being completely mandatory regardless of your playstyle. And again, that gets back to we don't want to force players into content that they don't inherently enjoy. We want to let you play the game the way you want to play the game.
Are you far more relaxed now with it's okay if people aren't logging in week on week? If they log in just for... Because you mentioned earlier, raid logging would be the prime example, but obviously in terms of logging in to do the specific thing it wants to do, because it's felt like for a good long time now, we want people online, we want WoW to be a part of their daily habits almost. By intention, your mission, even your mission board from BFA,
Sure.
collecting your Azerite power, whatever it might be. As a lot of these systems seem designed to engage somebody at least on a daily basis as the norm. So are you more relaxed now with that? Probably isn't going to be. It won't be for me. Is what I would say. It's not going to be. There's other options out there that are equally as fun, and maybe less fun, but also I can jump into that experience very quickly. You've got games like Path of Exile out there that are just free.
Sure.
Not going through a great time right now, but generally speaking, the market is so flooded with this. Is this something you're adapting to, accepting, or?
I mean, all the above to an extent. I mean, I think
they're just now getting to the point that they're realizing, hey, there's talented, hardworking people who have been developing and releasing these awesome games that are now becoming viable competition, and they are forced into adaptation, which is it's nothing but a good thing, because they had to get their heads out of their asses and just realize that the world keeps going. And when you I don't know, when you give an example like this, you have to keep living up to your example. It's like either you die a hero or you live long enough to become a villain. And I feel like at some point WoW has become a villain, but now I don't know, instead of finishing the villain arc, they're really trying to to do the redemption arc instead. And honestly, I do hope they make it.
Never want, our goal is never have it in the sense of you have to log in when you don't want to. Our goal is for you to want to log in. Our goal is for you to want to play World of Warcraft and to look forward to getting back into the game, to have something you want to complete, something you want to chase. And if you're not wanting it, then getting you to do it despite that isn't a victory for us. It's just burning people out. And so I think giving people the freedom to feel like they can take a step away, do something in real life, play another game for a while without falling behind is valuable. I think the one thing that we do worry about when it comes to sort of the raid logging phenomenon or people taking breaks is the social nature of the game, is sort of the critical mass of keeping a group together. If the person who is really excited to log in to do things with their guildmates logs in and no one from their guild is online, because of whatever reason, and then they just log back off kind of disappointed because they were hoping to play with friends, but their friends weren't around, that can be an issue. And I think that's something, you know, going back to WoD, to Warlords of Draenor, that was probably the peak of the raid logging era, where really there was like, other than checking your garrison, if it wasn't raid night, there was nothing to do. It wasn't, because Myth Plus didn't even exist back then.
As well, you know? Like,
yeah.
Go in, look at all 10 of your characters, or I think it was 10 at the time.
And so that
He's
felt
so
like,
nervous.
that felt like a step too, like too far toward that end of the spectrum.
You can tell.
But ultimately, you know, as long as we're keeping social groups somewhat healthy, we want people to be able to play the game in the way that makes them happiest.
This is so
Excellent.
important.
Like, this is
Simple
all
as-
very
simple as that,
positive,
right?
Yeah,
it's
it's like
it seems like it should. It's kind of a no-brainer, but
well, no, I mean
yeah.
that's the experience I've had, and I've been on some mystical quest now, like Kung Fu, is like trying all these different experiences. Like the main thing I'm seeing is they just create experiences that you want to log in for, you don't have to log in for, which is what I remember from World of Warcraft.
There's a player base of millions of folks who've said, we like this game, we've chosen to make this our home. We ignore them at our folly. Like, what do they want? What do they not want?
I think that's enough about gameplay. Dragonflight is changing so much. This mandatory content that we've been burdened with for the last 8 years is going away. There'll still be some stuff, and that's basically them wanting you to be excited about it. Come and check it out, see what it's like, but then you can leave it alone. It's more of an introduction than anything else, and I think that's a fair balance that they've struck. But now we need to move on to a more sensitive subject. The elephant in the room. Sexual allegations against Blizzard has been a prominent subject around the world. It's still ongoing, with lawsuits still pending. But let's find out what they've done to change things internally.
This is so very important.
Frat
that he
boy
went
culture.
and
That is how
asked this
Activision Blizzard is now being described
question.
here in this new lawsuit filed by the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing. The state agency alleges that female employees there are subjected to sex discrimination, unlawful sexual harassment, retaliation, and unequal pay.
Harassment? Is that how you pronounce
Let's get
this
into a few
word?
ground rules of this subject because it's a little sensitive, and investigations are still ongoing and probably will be ongoing for a while, which means we can't dive into specifics. We're simply not allowed. I'm also not a journalist. I am not the person who should be diving into this stuff. There are lawyers and things working on this currently to find out exactly what happened and make sure the right people are compensated. We know certain things have happened at Blizzard. We are fully aware that they have done a complete equity paycheck on every single employee in the business, making sure that person A doing the same job as person B are being paid exactly the same amount for doing that job. We know that has taken place and people are very happy with it. What we're going to do is give Blizzard the platform. We're going to ask the question of what their goal is overall. What is their philosophy overall to make sure things like this never happen again? Amongst all the Dragonflight changes that have come from the last 7 years of expansions, it's been so changed. But you've also had so much, and we've got to get into this, is like so much upheaval internally with COVID. We obviously had all the harassment stuff that came through and massive changes amongst the staff. Like, how have you dealt with that in terms of dealing with the motivation of the staff, the internal environment, and then pushing forward with an entirely new philosophy on the game for Dragonflight? It's got to have been a rough couple of years.
It's definitely been a challenging couple of years, but I think the team today is stronger and more tight-knit than we've ever been. Having come through that and having weathered it. I mean, COVID in 2020 was obviously, threw the whole world for a loop, to say the least, and began a process for us of relearning a lot of sort of lifelong creative and collaborative processes of how do you have what used to be the casual conversation around a whiteboard, or bouncing ideas off your office mate.
To talk about it yesterday, it's like it's very, very strange, and in the creative environment that's really hard. And you've done Shadowlands and Dragonflight in this new place, so it's got to have been for you who's leading the charge. It's like, okay, this is a lot of challenges to face.
I think it's been resolving some problems and figuring out systems and processes that work, and a lot of I think a lot of what we've come up with we would keep regardless. Even if we could all come back to the office tomorrow, there are certain meetings that we would have that we'd keep virtual forever. I think it is it's the social connections, it's the casual interactions that are the hardest to reproduce, but we continue to work at it. And then obviously the other,
I think a lot of people got tired of your casual interactions.
major event last year, I think really it triggered a period of ongoing self-reflection for the team as a whole, for the company as a whole. Starting last summer, it was both, looking inward to our culture, to our history, to, frankly ask, like, are we who the internet says we are? Is this who we really are? And I think the answer we came to is no, but also certainly it's who we never want to be and want to have no chance of being. And so how do we change
Also, is
our
this denial?
processes? How do we develop a culture of feedback and listening and openness and trust that makes sure that even the slightest hint of impropriety will be raised and dealt with before we ever got any place close to the allegations from years and years ago? But at the same time,
that he said that.
we were also listening to our player base and kind of re-examining, we were hearing lots of feedback, not just about anger at the revelations in the lawsuits, but about the state of the game.
Yep. It was a double whammy.
Your I'm quitting video very much included. Of like, we're missing something big here, right? Our goal at the end of the day is to make a world that players want to spend time in, that they're going to love spending time in, and that's the passion that drives all of us. And we're failing.
This is the third day we've been here on the Blizzard campus, and it's a strange, strange place. It's huge. 7 giant buildings housing Overwatch over there. They're doing World of Warcraft in there. They're doing WoW Classic over there. It's a weird, weird environment to be in because there's nobody here. Blizzard has been running about 15% staff on site since Shadowlands, since COVID kicked in, and it doesn't plan on changing. People that are here generally come in for 1 or 2 days a week. The rest of the time they work from home. And all across California, to the other gaming companies we've spoken to this week, that is going to stay exactly like that. The last 4 years have been really tumultuous for you guys.
Honestly, I think this is where we're gonna stop watching because I'm not gonna be covering the classic, and I skipped the first part of the interview as well. This is something that was really important for me to hear, and I think important for anyone watching this because I've never historically covered classic and I don't intend to. So I'm glad that we listened through this. This was actually very insightful. There's a lot of things that I heard that I'm glad they are talking about, that they're acknowledging. I think there is still a healthy amount of not ignorance, but I think that it's very hard for for people who have had this this attitude of like, no, you think you want this but you don't, or you think you don't want this but you do, kind of people, to just completely shift to like, okay, let's reflect back and just listen to the community and try to make something that's just good for everyone, starting from this like basically model of how they built the game to their overall attitude and their relationship with the community. It's very hard to and unrealistic to expect that these things are just going to change like that. But I think that acknowledgement and the fact that they're at least talking about this is probably a good sign. I don't feel like this interview has like completely shifted the way I feel about it. There's still some things that have been said that you noticed if you watched through this entire video, that you noticed I was skeptical about, and my opinion hasn't changed. There's going to have to be a lot of time, a lot of work being put into their both company culture and the game development for me to be like, damn, this is a different company now. But overall, at least these conversations are being had, and I'm glad to see that. It makes me happy, and it makes me hopeful that at least they know that these things are now out there, for the community to see, to discuss. And I really want to hear from you and what you feel about what's been said, especially if you were or have been a World of Warcraft player. But even if you're someone who was, watching from, like a side and seeing all these things develop and whatnot, I want to hear where you stand on how things have been, developing. If you're playing Dragonflight currently, I want to hear from you and hear about what your experiences in Dragonflight are. Are these things that they talked about in the interview, is this something that you now recognize in game? Or do you feel like a lot of these things are yet to be implemented? I'd love to hear about it. That's pretty much it for today. It was a little bit of a longer video, and if you watched this to this point, thank you, and I really appreciate that. I want to hear from you, and if you enjoy the content, RPGs of any kind, really, I upload a bunch of playthroughs, highlights, shorts, whatever is on this channel, including reactions and discussions like this. So if you enjoy the content, make sure to subscribe, not just to me, but also to Preach, who has been amazing throughout these years of providing coverage of World of Warcraft and other games, and have, they've just had this great community of people who have, just been providing us with such an insight. And I'm so happy and so glad that he got to do this, this project. It was a big deal to travel there and to get to talk to all of these people. So thanks again to Preach for making this and for choosing to share it with us and help us kind of gain more perspective on it. So yeah, make sure to go and subscribe. And yeah, that's gonna be it for today. Thank you again for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Bye.